In the previous videos, we learned about the local storage API. Now we're going to use local storage in a project on our website. In this project, we'll be using the same code that we've been using in the previous videos, and we're going to add a new page, like this form one here. And the idea of our project is sometimes we have a long form that if we fill in a lot of information and we accidentally close the page or navigate away, all of our information is gone. So that's the problem we're trying to solve using local storage. So I've made this form here and I've actually coded it up already, and I want to show you the behavior that I want to ultimately code. So we have this form and I'm going to type in some information here and we'll say web dev. And let's say I accidentally change pages. Now if I come back to the form, I actually want the things that I have added to already be in there. So if it's a really long form, I don't want to lose any information. So this is a great use case for local storage or session storage. Now the way we're going to implement this is actually using jQuery to create a plugin which will use local storage to actually store the data. If you want more information about creating jQuery plugins, check out our video section on creating plugins using jQuery. Now this is our HTML page that is our form. And we have our form with the different inputs that we ultimately want to save. So we have a first name, last name, just like a normal HTML form that you would create. Now if we get down to the bottom here, you'll see that we're including jQuery, and that's because we're going to be creating a jQuery plugin, so we want to include jQuery first. And then I'm going to actually write our code in this jQuery.autosave.js file. Now ultimately in our application to trigger this, I just want to use jQuery to fetch the application using the ID, and call this autosave function, which will activate it. So anytime we change the data in our form, it'll save it to local storage. And then if they come back to the page, we can restore the data into the fields. So I'm going to open up the jQuery.autosave.js, and here we'll see a little skeleton for a jQuery plugin. Basically, I'm going to create an autosave function that can be used on any jQuery object. And I'm going to have it accept a prefix argument. Now the first thing we want to do is actually set a storage variable. And the reason I'm doing it like this is right now for our uses, we're going to use local storage to hold the data. But depending on your use case, you might want to switch it out for session storage. Now because session storage and local storage both implement these same properties and methods, you can change them out really easily just by changing the value of storage in our jQuery plugin. Now the next variable we're going to add is a $this, and when we use a jQuery plugin, this pseudo variable will be set to the element that was being selected. In our case, this would be a form element, hopefully. So I'm going to create a shortcut variable $this to be the jQuery wrapped version of this form. We'll be using this a little bit later. Now because our jQuery autosave code might be used on different pages on the site, we want to make sure that each form is saved differently. For instance, if we had one form with a field called name and a different form also with a field called name, we want to make sure that they don't interact with each other and overwrite their data. So what we're actually going to do is when we're creating our form code, we're going to designate a prefix to it that should be unique per form on your site. Now, that's what the prefix that we pass in here is, but I also want it to be able to default to the ID of the form that we're passing. So I'm going to use this piece of code here, and what this says is if we have not passed a prefix, we'll set the prefix to this form's ID attribute. Now if it's not able to get a unique identifier, the prefix will probably collide between forms on your site, so it's good to either manually pass the prefix or have an ID on your form that you're doing the autosave on. Now, because the keys in local storage are simply strings, what we're going to do is have the keys that we're saving our form data into be a concatenation of our prefix and the name of the field in the form. So if we had a form called application and a field called first name, the actual key in local storage that it is saved to would be application first name. Now to separate the form prefix and the actual ID of the element, I'm going to just add a separator to the prefix. So the actual key will look like application and then a greater than sign and then the actual name of the input that we're saving. This is just a little way to differentiate what part is the prefix and what part is the name of the field. Now, one of the major pieces of functionality is to be able to save. So anytime our form is changed, we will save it out. The next piece of functionality we're going to have to implement is a way to restore that data. So if we have data stored in local storage, when they view the form, we should populate that form data using this restore function we're going to write. And finally, we need some clearing functionality, because once somebody submits the form, we should probably clear out all the data, so if they come back to the form, it's completely empty. So all we need to do is implement the saving functionality, the restore functionality, and the clearing functionality. Now once we do that, all we need to do in this initialization part is add these pieces of code. So we're going to use the $this variable, which is the form. We're going to say anytime that a change occurs, we want to call save. So if somebody changes a field in the form, we need to make sure to save it out to local storage. And then whenever the form is submitted, we'll use the clear functionality to make sure that the local storage data is cleared out, because we no longer need to remember it. Finally, as we initialize this, we want to restore, and this functionality will check to see if there's data in local storage, and then we'll restore it. So now we have the skeleton for our plugin written. In the next video, we'll add the functionality to save and clear the data from local storage.